All right, we're going to start with the end, just because this is much easier to see now than after it's installed. So there's this nut right here, and actually when you're working on the front board, you'll need to be doing it from behind. The other ones you'll be able to work from the front. That screws up and down. And the reason is, once you get it installed and the board is hanging from its carriage up here, then that bolt will be able to screw up, that nut actually, you'll be able to screw it up and lock it onto the carriage. All right, so right now I'm gonna have it all the way down, and then when I get it installed, I'll screw it all the way up and lock it in place on the carriage. Okay. I ground off the rounded parts of the hanger here, because now it will be much easier to install. Before we had to take these off. There's some screws on the back, which meant we had to take it off, hang it, and then put these back on, which meant these had to be in the front, and that just looked terrible. So I took off the rounds, so now they can go up the way they're intended. The hangers will fit in the gap right here between these supports, and then once they're up in here, there'll be enough distance to drop the bottoms of the boards into their runners right here, into their tracks. As is, the height of the hanger to the bottom of the board is too high to fit in that space. But by cutting off the rounds out there, you can get a little bit extra room, which is all you need to put the hangers up into the gap. That gives you enough space to get the bottoms into the tracks and drop them down. And then it's just a matter of lifting them up onto the carriages. And you can see, here's one of the carriages right here. All the other boards, you lift it up and get it into the carriage from the front. But the front board, there's not enough room in the front, so you'll lift it up and bring it into the carriage from the back. That's the only difference between the front board and the back boards. Much easier done with two people, but as I'm demonstrating, proving it can be done with one person. It'd just be much easier with two. What you see on the backboard there is I put the blue lines and then slid the board to see where it was rubbing on the backboard, and so I've identified that. I've marked where everything is at. I've identified where a stud is. There's two ways to deal with this. One, never slide the board. You give up one of the surfaces, but you protect all the surfaces. And then when the other surface eventually goes bad, and they always do, then you slide it and you got a whole new board. So that's one solution. The other solution is to put a screw in the middle of the warp and screw it against the wall. It'd be best to find a stud, but as you can see, that's off center of the whole thing, and that may not be completely effective. If you do it in the middle, then you're doing it just into drywall. That may not be completely effective. You could take the whole thing down and put an anchor in the drywall right where you want it, and then screw into the anchor. That's what I did with these ones over here, and they seem to be working just fine. But once I did those ones, it took the bulge and it split it into the two halves, so it's not as bulgy, but it's still bulging too much for that board to slide. So if you put a screw in here, then it would split the bulge between the two halves of each half, between the quarters, and then you'd be able to slide, but then you'd have a screw in the middle of the board, which would really be annoying. But those are the two ways to solve it. Either don't slide the board, give up one surface and just use the other, or put a screw in each board, and then you got a screw in the middle of the boards, but then you have all the surfaces. So that's up to you. I don't think there's anything else for the installation. For taking them down, it's just the reverse. You would unscrew this to unlock it from the carriage, lift it out of the carriage, and just let it set in the track. And then you would lift it up to get the hanger up into the gap, and then you would just angle it out. So just the reverse of putting it in. So, summary of putting them in. Angle it to get the hanger up into the gap, drop the bottom into the track, and then lift it into the carriages. And I find it best to have the carriages completely out of the way while you're putting it in, getting it into the tracks, and then move the carriages into place when you're ready to hang it. Let me know if you have any questions.